think, Marge. All I need is a title.
March along, sing a song with the army of the free. Count the brave, count the true, who have fought to victory. We're the army and proud of our name.
The position of President of the United States was unique when it was created after the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. The position was designed with the knowledge that George Washington, the hero of the Revolution, would be the first person to become president and leader of the country. Washington himself set up more aspects of the office, including a two-term limit, which he established after he retired after 8 years in office. However, that two-term 8-year limit was not actually written into the Constitution, and Washington could have served longer had he wanted to, and had he then ran for the office again, and had he won. Since 1797, no president served more than 2 terms until 1940 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term. He won and won a 4th term in 1944. He died in early 1945. Concerned about the possibility of policies enacted by a president who could win term after term, the Republican-led Congress approved the 22nd Amendment in March of 1947, and it was ratified in February of 1951. Since then, of course, there has been a number of 1- or 2-term presidents, but none have contested the 22nd Amendment or even moved for rescinding it. Opponents of the 22nd Amendment would say that it puts an unreasonable limit on the power of the people to select who they would want to be president. That if a person is doing a good job, why shouldn't they be allowed to run for a 3rd or 4th term? What if these arguments had defeated the approval of the proposed 22nd Amendment? What differences would that have made in terms of the president and the policies put forward under the various administrations? Our rules for this are simple. To be eligible, a president would have had to have served 2 terms and be possibly nominated for his party's candidacy for the next election. So John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, and George H.W. Bush are ineligible. Harry S. Truman and Lyndon B. Johnson did not get elected for a full 2nd term after winning their first. Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter were defeated after 1 full term. So in reality, defeating the 22nd Amendment does not do much, it might seem, from first glance, but there are some possibilities. Although Eisenhower served from 1953 to 1961 and accomplished quite a bit, including the start of the interstate highway system and the beginnings of civil rights, and the successful prosecution of the Korean War, by the end of his 2nd term, Eisenhower was seen as someone who was out of touch with the American people. He seemed more interested in a nap or golfing than attending to the running of the nation. But given his military career and presidential accomplishments, who could blame him? In the 1960 campaign, Eisenhower fully supported Richard Nixon. He told his friends, quote, "I will do almost anything to avoid turning my chair and country over to Kennedy," unquote. However, he was not immune from the occasional gaffe, which did not help the Nixon campaign. Because of his declining popularity by 1960, we do not believe that Eisenhower would have beaten JFK in the 1960 election. Given the tragic way that the Kennedy presidency ended, there are a lot of theories on how a Kennedy 2nd term would have played out, much less a 3rd term. Some speculate that Kennedy had plans to pull U.S. troops out of Vietnam and end American involvement in the region. Following the Bay of Pigs fiasco that was greenlit by Eisenhower, this would have been a tricky situation, and Kennedy might not have gotten a 3rd term had he survived to be re-elected in 1964. The people across the country really did not turn against the Vietnam War until the latter part of the 1960s. Lyndon B. Johnson, or LBJ, was lauded for the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the beginnings of the Great Society. But he was dogged by continued and deepened involvement in the Vietnam War. By 1968 he was quite unpopular and probably saw the writing on the wall, and therefore declined to run for re-election for a 2nd term. Richard Nixon was a fierce anti-communist, but it was he that made foreign visits to both the USSR and Communist China. It was this thawing of relations that allowed the United States to finally get out of Vietnam. Despite all of this, Nixon's faults led to his own downfall, and he was about to be impeached when he resigned in 1974. Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter were both essentially caretaker presidents, at least figuratively. President Gerald Ford pardoned former President Richard Nixon, much to the dismay of the general public. However, Ford realized that pardoning Nixon would remove both him and the larger Watergate scandal from the attention of the American public and government and allow for the nation to move forward, which was desperately needed. Of course, the electorate had their revenge on Ford when he was not re-elected. Jimmy Carter defeated Ford, thus fully resolving the issue of Watergate. While Carter had some achievements, such as the Camp David Accords, his economic and foreign policy mistakes quickly used up any goodwill from his humble homespun ideals, and he was defeated in 1980 after one term. President Ronald Reagan would be the second person eligible for a third term after Dwight D. Eisenhower. Reagan grew up as a liberal Democrat until 1962, when he proclaimed that "I didn't leave the party left me," and thereafter became both a Republican and a conservative. In fact, he quickly became one of the most well-known conservative policymakers in the country and was elected as governor of California in 1966. He ran for president 3 times, with a third attempt in 1980 being the charm. Reagan supported tax cuts, cuts in discretionary spending, spending increases on the military. He fought against unions and for a strong foreign policy. He confronted communism with a mix of bluster, diplomacy, and the demonstration that the United States could far outpace the Soviet Union, even in a weakened economic state. When Reagan backed the expensive and audacious Star Wars program, the Soviets realized that they would never be able to keep up, and Reagan is credited with basically winning the Cold War. Economically, Reagan had to fight the twin threats of both high inflation and high interest rates, which were slowing down the economy, leading to the recession of 1981 and 1982. However, once the economy recovered, the resulting boom greatly contributed to Reagan being re-elected in 1984. Reagan's foreign policy was centered on recovering America's strength, which had suffered following the outcome of the Vietnam War, which people saw as America's first lost war. To that end, he confronted communists in Grenada, backed Saddam Hussein in Iraq, even as that nation went into a slow, grinding war against Iran, and so on. In fact, it was these goals coming into conflict that severely threatened the Reagan presidency, when senior officials within the administration were caught selling arms to the Iranians in exchange for hostages. The funds from these transactions would then be funneled to the Contras, an anti-communist resistance group fighting the lefty government of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. While Reagan himself may not have known the details of the scheme, he took responsibility for it in a speech given in March of 1987.
My fellow Americans, I have spoken to you from this historic office on many occasions and about many things. The power of the presidency is often thought to reside within this Oval Office. Yet it doesn't rest here. It rests in you, the American people, and in your trust. Your trust is what gives a president his powers of leadership and his personal strength. And it's what I want to talk to you about this evening. For the past 3 months, I've been silent on the revelations about Iran. And you must have been thinking, well, why doesn't he tell us what's happening? Why doesn't he just speak to us as he has in the past when we've faced troubles or tragedies? Others of you, I guess, were thinking, what's he doing hiding out in the White House? Well, the reason I haven't spoken to you before now is this. You deserve the truth, and as frustrating as the waiting has been, I felt it was improper to come to you with sketchy reports or possibly even erroneous statements, which would then have to be corrected, creating even more doubt and confusion. There's been enough of that. I paid a price for my silence in terms of your trust and confidence, but I've had to wait, as you have, for the complete story. That's why I appointed Ambassador David Abshire as my special counselor to help get out the thousands of documents to the various investigations. And I appointed a special review board, the Tower Board, which took on the chore of pulling the truth together for me and getting to the bottom of things. It has now issued its findings. I'm often accused of being an optimist, and it's true. I had to hunt pretty hard to find any good news in the board's report. As you know, it's well stocked with criticisms, which I'll discuss in a moment, but I was very relieved to read this sentence. The board is convinced that the president does indeed want the full story to be told. And that will continue to be my pledge to you as the other investigations go forward. First, let me say I take full responsibility for my own actions and for those of my administration. As angry as I may be about activities undertaken without my knowledge, I am still accountable for those activities. As disappointed as I may be in some who served me, I am still the one who must answer to the American people for this behavior. And as personally distasteful as I find secret bank accounts and diverted funds, well, as the Navy would say, this happened on my watch. Let's start with the part that is the most controversial. A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Very little damage was done to the administration, in part because of a congressional faux pas that allowed the administration witnesses to basically make themselves popular while making Congress look quite stupid. All of this is reflected in the fact that Reagan was still quite popular in 1987, going into 1988, which would have allowed him to consider a third term. Had he ran, he would have won. Reagan's third term, running from 1988 to 1992, would almost be a swan song for the man. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1990, officially ending the Cold War, so Reagan was not only responsible for the victory in the Cold War, he oversaw the burial of the enemy. However, the laurels from that victory were short, as much of the peace dividend was spent on a tax cut and as a means to bail out the savings and loan industry, which had as a group largely been involved in risky investments. The United States government came to the rescue to the tune of just under $127 billion. At about the same time, Saddam Hussein, wanting to regain prominence after seemingly losing the Iran-Iraq War in 1988, invaded Kuwait, using a border dispute as an excuse. The U.S. administration expresses concerns but does not respond. Informally, there is talk that the incident is a Middle East affair, that Iraq is simply rebuilding after its defeat, and Reagan is spooked following the 1983 Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, which killed 299 American and French peacekeepers and led to the American withdrawal from Lebanon. Because of these events, Reagan would not seek a fourth term. His loyal Vice President, George H.W. Bush, had been shielded from most of the controversies from 1984 through 1992, and if a person wanted to continue Reagan-esque policies, the choice was clear. George H.W. Bush came into power and almost immediately had to face controversy as the Branch Davidians were confronted in their compound by ATF agents because of suspected weapons violations. After a 12-day standoff, Attorney General William P. Barr ordered the ATF and FBI agents to end the situation. They took the compound, rescuing most of the inhabitants. David Koresh committed suicide in order to prevent capture. The Bush economic policies were largely a continuation of policies began under Ronald Reagan, including tax reforms and the passage of the North America Free Trade Act, NAFTA, in November of 1993. In foreign affairs, Bush continued meetings with foreign leaders, including Boris Yeltsin in January of 1994. However, Bush changed course on U.S. policies by being intently involved in the events in the former Yugoslavia, leading to the bombing campaign in 1995, and the U.S. directly intervened in the genocide in Rwanda, sending in troops to quell the violence. In 1994, U.S. troops invaded Haiti to return John Bertrand Aristide to power. In 1994, the Republicans took control of the House of Representatives under the leadership of Congressman Newt Gingrich, who promised to bring all of the items from the contract with America to a vote on the House floor. Gingrich and President Bush maintained a close alliance from this point forward. Despite this, 16 years of GOP governance had tired out the public, who wanted change. They therefore elected Bill Clinton as the next president, defeating Bob Dole. The Bill Clinton era was one that was divided by one point in time. Prior to the fall of 2001, the Clinton administration was fixated largely on issues such as universal health care, the suicide of White House counsel and close friend Vince Foster, and the beginnings of the investigations into the presidency and its roots in various dealings in Arkansas. Of course, the world changed on the morning of Tuesday, September 11, 2001, when 19 Islamic fanatics hijacked 4 airliners along the eastern seaboard and crashed them into various targets. 2 planes destroyed 2 of the World Trade Center towers. A third building would be destroyed by debris from the first 2. Another plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon, while the 4th plane, possibly bound for the White House or the Capitol building, instead was down in a field in western Pennsylvania after passengers on the plane tried to retake it. After the attacks, Bill Clinton fought the war on terror as he thought best, but he could not bring himself to go after the regime responsible for protecting Osama bin Laden. While he was popular, Clinton's detractors painted him as lackluster in the struggle against fanatical Islam. So soon after the attacks, the American people wanted more than Clinton was giving them. As a result, he lost the election in 2004 to George W. Bush. Democrats were left to wonder about the lost possibilities of a third Clinton term. George W. Bush took the opposite approach from his predecessor. He increased the pressure on the Islamic states in the Middle East, especially Afghanistan, which resulted in the capture and death of Osama bin Laden in May of 2011. The successes of the Bush administration came at the same time that the government was running a prisoner camp outside of U.S. territory at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, as well as at various black sites scattered across the world. The establishment of so-called secret America contributed to what people were seeing as overreach into the private lives of the people. In the end, The ambivalent attitude of the people toward these policies, as well as the advent of the young senator from Illinois, Barack H. Obama, the first African American to be nominated by a major party for the presidency, were too much. Both of these issues meant that George W. Bush was defeated in 2012. Barack Obama rode a wave of historic optimism into the Oval Office in 2012, and in a calculating move, he decided to spend much of his political capital on universal health care, which critics soon derided as Obamacare. From that point forward, the president spent a lot of his time in defense mode against the Republican opposition dead set to oppose him where they could. At the same time, Obama found that speaking out against the secret state established in the aftermath of 9/11 was easier to do than actually moving against it. As a result, only the most egregious of the black sites located overseas were shut down. Perhaps the most impactful move on the part of Barack Obama was his appointments to the Supreme Court, with the appointment of Merrick Garland in 2016 and other liberal-leaning judges in 2018 and again in 2019, with the retirement of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who retired due to health concerns. Although the GOP lamented this swing in the court, which had been leaning at least somewhat conservative in its decisions, most senators felt that the president should have some amount of discretion on who he picks for the court. So it is 2019, and all eyes are looking forward to next year, where it is looking as though senior personalities within the Democrat Party, such as Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, are set to run against Republicans such as Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz, amongst others. On the outside are both Bernie Sanders, campaigning as a Democrat, and real estate mogul and reality TV star Donald Trump, campaigning as a Republican. There is also some talk of conservative personality Ben Shapiro getting into the race. We will simply have to wait and see, but this is shaping up to be an entertaining race. It is also one of the most contentious runs for President Obama as he campaigns for a third term. He again will have history on his side as the first African American president. It would be historic if he were to win a third term.